Greetings, everyone. It is the 10th of February, and it is Sabbath day, and we are going to go over a whole variety of different things today. But mostly we're going to stay on one topic. And that topic begins with us, with you. And the reality of our circumstance is that we are physical people. And my question today for you is, who are you? And what are you trained for? So, we're going to talk about our physical bodies, and we're going to talk about a whole variety of things that are related to a specific topic, which I will get to later. But what I want to know about people is, how are they built? How are they made? How have they been trained? And what have they been trained for? And when I look at God's church and I look at God's people, what I don't see is a bunch of people who are trained for war. There's a few here and there that were in the Marines or whatever, but what I don't see is people who have spent their entire lives learning how to become martial artists. I don't see people who have spent their entire lives learning how to shoot and kill other people. And I don't see this in most people. So, what happens when you are one of those people? Let's say you are one of those people. Let's say you grew up in a military household, and you were in the military, and you learned how to shoot people and how to kill people and how to do all of those things. What are you going to do with that? Where God's concerned, what are you going to do with that? You are able to defend yourself. You are able to defend those around you. But what are you going to do with that? And the answer is that it's very hard to do anything with that related to God. Why is that? And the answer is that it's related to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and what is good and what is evil for you. And when it comes right down to it, when we learn the art of war and we learn how to fight, we cause ourselves a great deal of difficulty in learning how to behave like God wants us to behave. So, mixed about how to talk about this, and I'm mixed how to approach it, because there are some very, very difficult things that I need to say today. But let's say, for instance, that you are that guy who can defend yourself and who can defend your family, and that you can do it really well. In fact, you can do it so well that you're kind of a superhero. You know, maybe you should be on TV. Maybe you're really good at doing these things in such a way that you're a superhero. And maybe you're so strong, or you're so tough, or you're so smart that you can be a superhero and you can defend yourself and the people around you from evil, from the things that go bad. Let's say you are. Let's say that you've prepared your entire life, you've prepared your circumstances, you've got your little hideout up in the mountains, and you are prepped and ready for anything to come in the end time. You're tough, you got your guns, you're strong, you may even have all the people around you that are in agreement with you, and you're doing what you need to do. You're a survivalist, you're a prepper. and you're young and in good shape, and you're ready to be a superhero and defend your people. There's a big problem with that. What happens with superheroes? Who are superheroes? They're people who defend the weak, and they look for justice, and they kill the bad guys or haul them off to jail or whatever. And they make sure that the world is a good place to live in. It's the problem with this. Problem with this is that we're living in the end time, and that God's about to crush everything. And when you're defending yourself, who are you defending yourself against? It was problematic because God's going to send his own army against this nation and against his own people. So who are you defending against? And in the process of defending yourself and the people around you, who do you become? The big problem with superheroes on the TV is that they always become like the evil that they're fighting. It's a theme that they have within these various shows, that it's a problem. It's like paganism, the yin and the yang. The center of good is evil, and the center of evil is good, and they have this problem where they're going around and around in circles, chasing each other all the time. And this is a merry-go-round that God's people have got to get off. It is a problem in the whole world when we seek our own judgment as to what it is that we should do in any given circumstance. And I will tell you that it is a vicious merry-go-round that is bound and determined to kill us. So why am I coming at this in this direction, in this way? Well, it's because I was reading along, actually in Matthew, and I came across something that most every Christian knows. Every Christian has looked at, every Christian has read, every Christian, at least on the surface, understands. And the people who understand it the most are the people who are helpless. They're the little old ladies who can't defend themselves at all, who are unable to do anything against someone who attacks them. That doesn't necessarily mean they have the right attitude about these things. That doesn't mean that they are going to respond correctly. But it does give them a better understanding of where they stand in this world and in this life. Let's go ahead and read in Matthew 6, verse 27 for a minute. But I say unto you, which hear, you who hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smites you on the one cheek, offer also the other, and him that takes away your cloak, forbid not to take your coat also. So we get to these scriptures that are all men, all real men, are somewhat uncomfortable with because pride has to take a back seat whenever you talk about these things. And not only does pride have to take a back seat, but a lot of other things have to take a back seat. And there's not a lot that we can do about it. Sorry, I'm messing with my thingy here because it's not doing what I want. That's better. So when we talk about Matthew and Mark and Luke, mostly Luke and Matthew in this particular instance, we run into some issues that are really difficult for men who have pride to address. And it's not just pride that we're talking about here, it's some other things that are very serious. So, and where those serious things come in is when we talk about our families and when we talk about the hopeless and the helpless that are around us that can't defend themselves. So we might be able to walk into a grocery store or something like that, and some robbers come up and attack and rob the store, and in the process, they threaten your child. This is a very different circumstance than if they point the gun in your face. At least for most men, there's a difference. So, how do you do that? How do you go about this loving your enemy when he's threatening your child? Loving your enemy when he's threatening your wife? Loving your enemy when he's threatening you? And how do you turn the other cheek when the first cheek that was hit is your child? Bit of a problem for most men and for a lot of women. What do women do when you hurt their children? They lose it. Frequently, they lose it and they become all teeth and claws. And yet, we don't see teeth and claws in Luke 6:27 or 28 or 29 or even 30. Give to every man that asks you, and of him that takes away your goods, ask them not again. Somebody comes and takes your stuff, whether you agreed to it or not, don't go looking for it. As you would that men should do to you, do you also to them likewise. This is the problem. And we're going to have to get to the root of it because most people can't do this. Most people can't do this. I have a hard time doing this. About 20 years ago, somebody held me up with a knife, and my reaction was instantaneous, pure rage. And my foot came up and grazed the side of his head, and my fist went out and grazed the other side of his head. There were two of them actually. And the reality of it is that I just became enraged that someone would dare to do that to me. And that's not okay. God just said, that's not okay. So we have to change our behavior patterns and everybody has different behavior patterns. Some people would just give up, do what they're supposed to do, and walk away. Oh, here's my money. Goodbye. And then they'll turn around and rage inside themselves and become the victim. And mental breakdown because of this kind of thing. What is our attitude supposed to be when something like this occurs? For if you love them which love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. And if you do good to them which do good to you, what thank have you? For sinners also do even the same. And if you lend to them of whom you hope to receive, what thank do you get? What thanks do you get? For sinners also lend to sinners and receive again as much. But when these things happen, love you your enemies and do good and lend or whatever. The point is that this is all about love. And that's hard to face. God says that we're supposed to turn the other cheek. And by implication, this means that we have to love the person who's hitting us and not to hit them back. And there are people who have understood this and gained the knowledge and the understanding of this. And it's probably usually been in the form of, World War II circumstances where people have learned to rise above who they naturally are. Let's go over to Matthew, the companion scripture, and let's read what it says over there. Verse 38. You have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And I'm going to stop right there for a little while. The issue isn't the cheeks. Whether it's Luke or Matthew, the issue isn't the cheeks. The issue is right here in verse 39, that you resist not evil. Right there is the most important sentence in this whole section, as far as the implications of what it is that we must do. How do you resist not evil? Don't resist evil. Is God talking about principalities and powers? No. What's he talking about? He's talking about your cheek. He's talking about your body. He's talking about your flesh. If any man will sue you at law and take away your coat, let him have your cloak also. He's talking about the things of the flesh, and he's talking about your flesh. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, up here. This is a discussion about flesh. What is your flesh? It's your person, it's your clothes, your money, your car, your family, your children, your parents, anyone and everyone around you. Don't resist evil. It's a pretty tall order, I think. How do you do that? Somebody decides they want to claw their way into your house in the middle of the night, and we're not supposed to resist evil. And what do they do to your family? This says don't resist evil in your flesh. Don't resist evil. It doesn't give you a context of where. We're not talking about the Castle Doctrine. We're not talking about the Constitution of the United States of America. We're not talking about, your rights under the law. We're talking about what God says. Your rights under the law say you can defend yourself in your house. Your rights under the law of Babylon, of America, say that you have no duty to retreat when someone misbehaves in your presence. The laws of America say that if three people attack you, or even two, that you can use a gun and shoot until there's only one of them left. When a mob attacks you, you have the right to defend yourself. There's lots of rights that you have under the Constitution of the United States of America that God didn't give you. And God says, resist not evil. So we can choke down our pride. As a man, you're alone. Go into the grocery store or the convenience store, and somebody starts mouthing off, tags you, and bam, suddenly you got a black eye. But you get up, you suck it up, and you walk away, not having resisted evil. The story changes when our families get involved. The story changes when your wife or your child is involved. And that's a problem because this is a thing that we have to face before these things happen. Mentally, you have to prepare to resist not evil before it happens, or your natural inclinations to take over, your natural inclinations to fight and to defend. And if you don't have your pride under control to start with, it's likely to get the best of you. This is a difficult and uncomfortable thing that most people read over, say, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. And then we continue on without ever really truly addressing it in our soul, in the heart of who we are. We don't address this issue. Why don't we do that? Some people do. I'm not saying the little tiny little old ladies haven't addressed it, because sometimes they have. They may not have addressed it properly with their attitude, but they've thought about it. But we have to address this properly before we get into that circumstance, or we will fail, because this is a hard one. This is a really hard one. We're in the end time. So, what is different about this end time that is going to make the difference in how we behave? The first thing we have to understand is why God's doing this. Why did God say, resist not evil? God's pretty smart. Why did he say, don't resist evil? Are we pacifists? Are we here just because, we should never hurt anything? And the answer is absolutely not. Pacifism is not what God's about. Oh, God's not about pacifism. The end time is about the day of the Lord's anger. The end time is about the destruction of the evildoers. The end time is about what God's going to do to make the earth pacific and peaceful. So, that being said, why does God tell us not to resist evil? Or sorry, to not resist evil in the flesh. Why does it say that you resist not evil in the flesh, in the daily life of things around you? And the answer is actually kind of simple. And the answer is in the fact that this is the end time. And I'm not saying this doesn't apply outside the end time, but it is ever so much easier to understand in the end time because of what God's doing. God is separating the wheat from the chaff. God is separating the sheep and the goats. God is separating that which is acceptable to him from that which is evil and unacceptable. And you have no idea who is acceptable to him and who is not. You cannot judge who is in God's kingdom and who is not. You not only can't decide, but you can't tell what is in the hearts of men. So, who are you going to defend when you resist evil? And who is coming for the people around you? Who is going to destroy the people around you? And the answer is actually really, really simple. God is coming for you, for your good or for your evil. And he's coming for everybody in your family, for their good or for their evil. And he's the one who's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. He's the one that's going to determine who lives and who dies. And what happens when you resist evil? Let's back up for a second and ask ourselves, how is God going to separate the wheat and the chaff? So the answer is very easy, and I've said it 100 times. It's called a harvest. What do you do when you harvest? You cut off everything. You cut off everything. Whether it's a combine or, some other form, you have to harvest things by cutting them off at the roots. And then you separate the wheat from the chaff and you burn the chaff. What do we use to harvest? A combine. It's a tool. What does God use to harvest? The beast. He uses evil men to harvest the whole world. And what is the purpose of those men? To go out and cut all of his people off at the roots so that he can separate them and put them where he wants them. And these men are evil, but they're doing a service for God. So, what happens when you resist the evil? You're resisting God. That's a problem. What if God wants your son to die? Are you going to stop him? I don't think so. What if he wants your son to live? And yet your son resists evil and is killed by the bad guys. What happens when you resist evil? On a personal level, what happens when you resist evil? What happens when you're in that convenience store and evil comes upon you in the form of some person with an attitude? What happens when you resist evil? It's called a fight. When you resist evil, a fight ensues. It is guaranteed. When evil comes and you resist it, you will be engaged in a fight. And yet, what God says is don't get involved in this fight. God says rise above it, be like God, and stay out of the fight. And the problem with this is it goes against everything that man has been taught from the time he was a baby. Whether it's in the schoolyard or in prison, respect has to be maintained. There have to be boundaries. We have to establish those boundaries, and other people have to respect them. And our boundaries as Christians must be different than the average prison yard or schoolyard. Most of us are not prepared to deal with that, especially when someone comes into our house and rapes our wife or our daughter in front of us. I'm making this as bad as it can possibly be so that you understand that God still doesn't want us to resist evil. Because we have to take on his perspective and his understanding. Very hard to deal with mentally. So, what's missing from this picture? What's missing from this picture? And the answer is that besides this instruction, God is missing from this picture that I have created. So, what's missing from the picture? And the answer is that God is missing from the picture. Because who do we rely on? God. Who do we rely on except God. The reality is that we have to trust God with ourselves and with our families. And we have got to learn not to resist evil while doing so. I tell you, this is no joke. Because if we resist evil, we will get in a fight that we cannot win. Even if you're a superhero, you can't win it because God trumps superheroes, and God's army is not going to fail. Read Joel 2. So, how do we deal with this circumstance? Mentally, we've got to change who we are and what we represent and where we're going so that we can actually turn the other cheek, so that we can actually avoid resisting evil. And this is an everyday life. This is an everyday life. Verse 40, Matthew 5, verse 40. And if any man will sue you at law and take away your coat, let him have your cloak also. If somebody compels you for some reason, give them what they ask for and give them something else. And whosoever shall compel you to go a mile, go with him too. Give to him that asks you, and from him that would borrow of you, turn you not away. Don't close your door. Let people take everything that you have. It's hard to live in this world when people treat you in this fashion, isn't it? When you can't even keep food on your table, and I'm saying when it gets a little rougher, because people will take everything that you have. Because there's a time coming when people will take everything that we have. And you have to be ready to give it up and walk away and let your family members be hurt if God so wills, because it is God's will. It's God's will that this world end. And it's God's will that He be able to harvest this world and turn it into something that is pleasant and gentle and kind at all times. And who's going to be in that world? People that don't resist evil in the flesh. Somebody's bound to say, oh, well, that's not what David did, and that's not what the Israelites did back in the day. And I say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because David killed all those Canaanites and all those Philistines and all those different people. But why did he do it? Because God commanded him to do it. And he checked with God before he went out and did it. And you know what? There will be sons of David that do the same things again. In that day, he that is like David will be like God. There will come a time when we fight against the flesh in the end time. But that time is not now. And God has not commanded that now. What God has commanded is that we resist not evil in this time. In part, we don't resist evil as a mercy to those that are evil. Because if we don't forgive the evil, then we don't forgive. And God gives mercy to whom gives mercy. If we're merciful, then God will give us mercy. And if we're not, he won't. And it doesn't matter if those who are abusing us are the ones that we give mercy to. It does matter in that we must give mercy to those people when we might have the power to destroy them physically and keep them from harming us. But if we do that, we're not like God. We're not like our Messiah, who came down here and did not resist evil. Principalities, powers, sure. That's a different discussion. He did not resist evil in the flesh, and he allowed his flesh to be destroyed. And we have to allow our flesh to be destroyed, even our kids and our wives and our parents. And that's a really, really hard thing to do when you're a man or a woman or a child, especially as a grandparent. Resist not evil is a command with many, many difficult consequences associated with it. But where do we put our trust? Will God defend us? And the answer is, according to your faith, be it unto you. What happens when we defend our child from something? And maybe that was that moment for that kid, 20 some years old. Maybe that was his moment to obtain a better resurrection by becoming a martyr. And what if we interfere and get ourselves killed before God as well? What happens with 10-year-old kids that are killed in wars? Who looks out for 10-year-old kids in wars? Ask them over in the Ukraine. Who looks out for them? And the answer is nobody, unless your God is the only true, real God. And your faith comes under fire. Your belief is going to come under fire. It's going to be tested. God can deal with children. How many children have died in the history of this world? Billions have died. And God knows how to deal with that. We have to learn how to deal with it also. So I'm going to ask another question. If you're that superhero, you're that tough guy, and you can defend everybody, and you can, do what you got to do with your guns and your fists. How are you going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death with 10,000 men dying on your right hand and 1,000 women and children dying on your left hand, or vice versa? How are you going to walk through there with a clear conscience if you're all about saving people from evil? Can't do it because you engage and fight against that which cannot be beaten and die. Because when God brings the beast on this nation, anyone who fights against the beast is going to die because they're fighting against God. They can fall on their sword and they won't be hurt. They're not going to hurt each other. There's going to be no friendly fire. They're going to run upon the walls and through the windows, and they're not going to have any problems killing. And if you're here in that circumstance, and 10,000 women and children and old people die on your right hand, and 1,000 cripples and hospital victims of who knows what horror die on your left hand, how are you going to walk through that horror before God? Except in faith, believing and obeying what he has said. It can't be done without following the principles that God has said. Can't be done. It cannot be done. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Won't fear any evil. How can you not fear evil? Because if you're walking with God and you don't resist the evil will slide right past you because God is defending you. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. But this is not a thing that you get to without using your brain. This is not a thing that you get to without understanding what you're dealing with mentally and emotionally beforehand. Nobody walks into the end time with the destruction that God is going to do and behaves like God without thinking about it first. Nobody naturally does that. They might do some of the things, but you only walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil because of faith and because you know who your Messiah is. Sorry, it's on airplane mode, yet it's still dinging. The realities of this are enormous. And the things that we have to deal with in this circumstance, the end time, are emotionally catastrophic. And we have to choose what it is that we're going to do when these times come, because they are near, even at the very door. We've been trained to act as men and to defend our families and to defend our country. The saying is God, family, country, except for we conveniently forget about God all the time. This is such a harsh thing if you look at it without God being there. And it is such a relief if you look at it and know that God is your Savior, your personal Savior. And when I mean personal Savior, I mean He will save you in the time that He must. Doesn't mean you're not going to go through some trouble, doesn't mean you're not going to go through some trials, doesn't mean that the people around you, most of them, aren't going to die, because a lot of them will. It is inevitable. Because when God separates the wheat from the chaff and the sheep from the goats, it is inevitable that they are separated violently. Who are you to stop that? Who are you to tell God who He's going to save and who He's not in any given moment? Who are you to prevent God from killing someone who's close to you? You can't. But will you die? Try? Will you die the death and go down to the sides of the pit because you won't accept God's judgment? This is a serious, big deal. Very serious, big deal. And there is nothing that you can do to stop this from happening in the end time. You can't stop it. It won't be stopped. So we have to behave the way God asked us to be and not to resist evil and not to resist people who would take away our things. Because soon their lives will be taken from them. Have a little pity on these people who are running around stealing and murdering and doing all the things that they should not do. Have a little pity on them because they're about to die. God's about to kill them. And it might be a good idea if we were to pity them a little bit. God sends the rain on the just and the unjust. He pities them in this way. God loved the whole earth. He gave His only begotten Son. And it's a shame that more people aren't taking advantage of the sacrifice of our Messiah. But will you, knowing that the cost may be the death of some of the people right around you, close to you, maybe even while you watch in horror, not resisting evil? Is God strong enough in you for you to not resist evil? Can the love of God penetrate you, and the pity for these people who are dying penetrate you enough that you have enough perspective to be able to watch death around you? Whether it be 10,000 and 1,000, or one or two, or 50 or 100. It's all death around you. The closer those people are you, the more personal it is. Can you allow God to do what he's going to do in the end time with a good attitude? God's told us he's going to do it over and over and over. Let's go over to Matthew 13, verse 41. So, what's going to happen in the end time? The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. God's going to separate all these things. God's going to destroy the evil and the wicked. And we have no input on this. The only input we have is to follow him in righteousness, doing what he wants us to do in faith, believing, and following. And there is absolutely nothing that we can do to stop this process. It's going to happen, and our flesh is going to be destroyed. Everything that we're aware of, everything that is in our existence is going to cease to exist in one form or another. Our houses, our cars, our bank accounts, our families, our social structure, our churches, everything is going to break down. That's what happens when God harvests. He cuts it all off, he destroys it all, and yet saves alive that which is good. And this is who we are in the end time, is grains of wheat, and the combine's coming. Do you ever imagine what happens? How scared wheat is when the combine starts coming? Or corn? We can have no fear of the evil that's coming. And if the main thing that's been inspired by all this discussion of this is your fear, then that's a problem also. But it's a good thing if you fear he who has the power to send you to the sides of the pit and into the lake of fire. Fear him and don't resist evil, because evil's coming and God has sent it. Can there be evil in a city and I have not done it? Says the Eternal. God's bringing this circumstance. He's going to end the world. And you live in these times, which is a tremendous opportunity to find God. Or if you refuse, it's a tremendous opportunity to die. And not all of those who die are dead. Not all of those who die are dead. There are martyrs, and there are people that God takes away before this happens, and there are people that are die just to try us. And God will preserve them. But we don't have any say in most of these matters. Endure to the end. Endure to the end. God's solving a whole bunch of problems, and he's told us what we need to do. On so many levels, he has told us everything that we need to do. We need to behave like him. In this circumstance, we have got to behave like him when he was on this planet. And if we don't, it's going to be very, very ugly. Physical things in your life are not important. They're just not. Even your family. Why? Because you have to trust God to deal with your family. Some of us know that our families are a mess and that things have got to be done to solve some of these problems. And other people are living in denial, thinking that everybody around them is, they're all in the kingdom. Will bring you one of a city and two of a family. Not everybody's going to make it. And we have to be willing to let God do his work and not resist him. Because the evil that is going to surround us on every side is his doing. And he's doing it for a purpose, for a reason. It's not just to oppress us. It's to solve things. It's to fix problems. It's to correct the whole world. Are you going to let God do what he's supposed to do? Are you going to follow his will in this matter? And there are lots of people that are going to say no. I'm not trusting God. I'll defend him to the death. Will, if that's your decision. Straight is the gate, and narrow is the path, and few there be that go in thereat. Wide is the gate to destruction, and many there be that travel that path. We're going to have to stand as pillars, regardless of what happens around us. We're going to have to stand as pillars while death surrounds us and passes by. We're not the first ones that have had this problem. We're not the first ones. What happened to the Israelites in Egypt? They put blood on the lintels knowing that every house that didn't have it was going to have dead in it the next morning. They knew that their neighbors were going to die. How many times has God destroyed his own people? How many times has God destroyed his temple, his own house? How many times has God destroyed Israel or Judah or Jerusalem? And he's going to do it again in the end time. In Babylon is the vengeance of the eternal, it's the vengeance of his people and of his temple, his church. We resist everything that flows around us. Are we going to resist and die? Because if you resist, you will fight and you will die a fruitless death without meaning. We're not the first to go through this. Who was our Messiah? He did not resist evil. Could he have resisted evil? Yeah. 12 legions of angels would be presently here. But he didn't resist evil. He didn't resist Caiaphas and Annas and all the people that came to get him and to hang him on a cross. He didn't resist. And who are we? Are we not the body of Christ? Are we going to resist our crucifixion? Are we going to resist our children's, or parents, or wives or husbands' crucifixion? That's not. Though it hurts. He that loses father or mother, or brother or child will receive again 100-fold. But God's going to do this regardless of what we say, regardless of our will. And we need to get in line and understand what he's doing and why he's doing it and how we can contribute in a good way by not resisting evil. Because resisting evil in the flesh is going to get you killed. Do we resist principalities and powers? Absolutely. Do we resist evil thoughts? Absolutely. Take every thought into, word went right out of my head, captivity. Every thought into captivity. But we don't take people into captivity. We don't need slaves. We don't want slaves. The truth shall set us free from captivity. And right now, most of us are captivated by our idols, by the idolatry that's all around us, by the money, by all the sin that we're so involved in, and we can't see it enough to let it go. And when evil comes upon us, most of us, especially the people who are blind, are going to resist it and die. This is the end time. It's not like Christ's time. It is somewhat in that we're supposed to act like he did, but it's not the middle and it's not the beginning. It's not the time of David. It's not the time of the first captivity into Babylon. This is the last captivity into Babylon. It is the end time, and it's all going to end completely. Faith and belief in God, that he is your defender and your protector, and that he will bring his wheat into the end of the harvest, that he will save his wheat, that you have no say in who he judges worthy to be in his kingdom. It's not your kingdom, it's his kingdom. And he'll bring in anyone he wants, whether they're alive or whether they died. He judges the quick and the dead. And nobody dies without God being willing, else he would preserve them alive. This is the most difficult of things that there are for us to swallow as Christians. This is the hardest thing for us to face, is the destruction of our flesh and the destruction of the flesh of our people without resistance. Allowing God to do his will in our lives, knowing that destruction will be all about us and that we will have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil. We're not supposed to resist evil, and we're not supposed to fear it. Those two things are absolute. Resist not evil in the flesh, and fear no evil. Because evil can only destroy the flesh, it can't destroy the spirit. And if your family is someone God has chosen and they die, they are not dead. And if they do die and they are dead, what can you do about that? It was never your choice. It was never your problem. You have to deal with it. But you didn't choose that for them. They chose that, if that's the circumstance. And you have to be okay with that. But you also have to not judge other people unto death. It's not your business, it's God's. He judges the quick and the dead. The problem is that we have all judged everyone. In modern Christianity has judged everyone to live. So nobody can die. So nobody feels bad. It's called a lie. And it's false. And it's ugly. And it's causing so much trouble with God's people. Because none of them fear him, because he didn't Well, he's not going to kill anyone. He's harmless, which is an absolute lie because God is the king of all creation. He made it for a purpose, for a time, and he's going to destroy it when that purpose is accomplished to his satisfaction. And we're going to be there at the destruction because it is imminent. Resist not evil, reflect. You won't like it if you do. Like it for a very short amount of time if you do it all.